We're making the face mask quarantine style. So I'm in my little home studio. I have traced the women's and teens size, let me see if I can get the camera right, onto pattern ease, which is a really easy to use traceable stabilizer for your patterns. Also added a 1/4 inch around, like the pattern kind of calls for, and so that'll make it to where I can just cut this puppy out. You can also cut them in big piles if you want to cut a bunch at a time. I'll be showing you to cut one at a time. This is the teen and woman size mask. I have a lot of nurse friends and they're running low on masks, so I thought I would make a couple different varieties. This is for the classic variety of the mask. You're going to cut a lining piece, and you also need an outer piece. So for the outer piece, we need to add 1 inch to the ear side of the pattern, meaning this for the outer piece of the pattern needs to extend 1 inch out here. So I'll show you that first. Put this down. Put a couple pins. I'm going to use a little quilting ruler to give myself 1 inch, not from the 1/4 inch that I added, but from the actual line of the pattern. Cut that with a rotary cutter. Makes it a little bit easier. You can use the rotary cutter for this, or you can use a pair of fabric scissors. I like a rotary cutter for the straight parts, fabric scissors for the curvy part. But use what you have. This is a quarantine situation, so you can use what you've got. I also pre-washed this fabric, so you want to make sure that everything's pre-washed. At A&A Sewing, like we talked about, we'll be accepting these patterns, these masks, and so we will be washing them again, but to prevent any shrinking or weird distortion happening to the mask once they're being actually in use and being washed very often, we want you guys to pre-wash your fabric. This is going to be for the lining, so I don't need to add anything special for the lining piece. I'm just going to chop it out. I'm using the same fabric. This is 100% quilting cotton, which is a nice, like, densely woven cotton, mostly because that's what I've got, so definitely use what you have. But we want to pay attention and make sure that we're adding that 1/4 inch around this piece. You can also use flannel. We're in Louisiana. It's a little warm here. Because this is a dense cotton, we're thinking it's going to have pretty much good results. Okay. Alright, so lining and outer. Now we'll go to the machine and start putting this together. It doesn't take a long time. Like I said, if you're going to mass produce these things, just cut a big pile out. You can use a rotary cutter. I like this size rotary cutter for cutting curves, but use what you've got. I can't stress that enough. It's not that important to go out and buy a bunch of gadgets to make these. And I want you guys to stay tuned throughout the video because I'll be showing you an option with a pocket for the nurses to put an insert in. These are more home use style with just the regular lining. And I'm also going to show you an option if you don't have elastic, how to do it with the binding. So hang in, we're going to go to the sewing machine. So lining, outer, we're going to go ahead and put this under the machine. I always choose to cut mine out right sides together so that I don't have to do anything. I can slap it right underneath the machine and it's ready to go. We want a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we do want a back stitch here. My stitch length is a machine standard. I'm sewing on the Janome 15,000. The standard straight stitch is 2.4 in length. I also put on my straight stitch plate, mostly because you're going to be sewing near these little tips of this fabric. You don't want it to get eaten by your machine with a nice wide plate. So easy peasy. So we're going to do it again on this one. You can imagine mass producing this would not be a hard task at all. Just have a huge stack of outsides, a huge stack of linings, and you'll be in business. Alrighty, I'm going to show you this demo without going to the iron because I think that's something that might help you in your mass production. We're going to, this is a little pair of Kai scissors that's really sharp. I'm going to snip the seam, and I don't know, most of us are quilters, so you don't think about doing curvy stuff. If you've ever made a teddy bear or anything with a curvy seam, you just want to snip at an angle all the way along to, you don't want to touch your seam line, obviously. We still want it to be strong. And we're not even cutting notches out. We're going to be pressing this over to the side with our fingers and top stitching. So that's just going to help it to be really smooth. So I'm going to do the same thing for the outside and the lining. And like I said, your two fabrics may not match each other. This is just for convenience for me. They can match each other, but they don't have to. Okay, so seams are snipped that way. I'm keeping my stitch the same. Sometimes for top stitching, we like to lengthen the stitch. That is total preference. Most of the time, my top stitch, I like to be like 2.8. Make those changes. Alrighty, so now I'm just pulling this, pressing with one side with my thumb to make sure that my seam stays pressed over. Now here's a thing to think about, sewing enthusiasts. We want to do both of these the same because they'll be facing each other. So once you're done, you want to do the second, so I just did the lining piece, pressed it to one side, gave it a little top stitch. You want to do the other piece exactly the same direction because they'll be facing one another. So sometimes I have to look because I don't do them all the same way. That would be too easy, I guess. So if I'm imagining pushing it underneath, I want it to go to the right so that it matches that. Then whenever I put them together, they'll kind of nest together. So I'm just giving my fabric a little tug apart. There we go. That's a little bit easier. So all I'm trying to do is open that up with my fingers. You don't have to go to the iron. If you'd like to, you can, but in the name of speed, we can skip the iron. Alrighty. So both pieces are top stitched. Now because they're top stitched, when I put them right sides together, let's see if I can do that. Can you see that? These seams are going to nest. I want that line to be the same. This is going to be the line that goes down the front of the face of this mask. I'm going to use a little clip for the video. You can use pins. I find it takes me a little longer with the pins, so try to not be too clumsy for you guys. I just want to clip those center seams together. And then the rest of the mask kind of wants to line up, which I love that. I love when it wants to give you a little help. So we'll go ahead and sew that bottom side together first at 1/4 inch. Can you guys see that? Oh goodness, there we go. A little better. So I'm just gonna lay it flat, 1/4 inch. Same thing, use your normal seam length, 2.4. We do want to back tack here. It's not like quilting. We need to secure this because this will be washed a lot. I kind of hold my finger here while it goes through there. You can raise your foot and kind of pivot here if you feel the need. Depending on how you cut it out, you may not need to pivot. Okay. So that's the bottom edge done. You're going to flip it, go ahead to the top edge. This one has a curve. Okay, don't panic about the curve. They're cut the same. You know they're cut the same because you cut them. So go ahead and this will line up. I'm going to move this out of the way. Just kind of hold this in there. If you are a quilter or a sewing enthusiast, you know what a purple thing is. Use your purple thing. It's a plastic stiletto that'll help you stay close to those edges. So now we have a nice little inside out mask. Our little nose shaping here. One of my little notches got flipped. That's okay. So we're going to do the same concept with these curvy edges. We're going to clip them. don't have to go overboard. I do a few on the inside curve. Usually I kind of try to cut some of that bulk out. Cut it into my machine, that's not a good thing. A few little snips there and you're good. Then we're going to turn this inside out in order to do our top stitching. So this is what makes it kind of look like an actual mask. I'm going to zoom back out a little bit. Okay, now we can see the shape of this little guy. We nested our seams together. That top should line up really well. Don't panic if it doesn't. I'm just, you know, it's instructions. I'm giving you the best instructions I can. So we're going to take this to the iron, press that down, and then we're going to top stitch. So I'll be right back. Okie doke, so hit it with the iron, very smooth. You want to make sure you're flattening it out here as well to make sure that that lining fits nicely in the outside. But right now what we want to do is top stitch. So I'm going to flip it over. I like a stitch length of about 3 here, so you want to go a little bit longer. And so all we're doing here is staying kind of close to this edge, and you'll notice your lining is a little bit smaller than your outer right here. When I'm top stitching, I want to top stitch from this end all the way across. Later on, we're going to like that because that's going to help us hold that flap down whenever we're flipping this. So we're going to top stitch from very end all the way across. It's just going to kind of help us hold it down a little bit. Same thing, a little back stitch just for security. Make your fabric go where you want it to go. This is kind of in the way. Turn the little nose piece inside out real quick. All the way to the end of this piece as well. You'll be glad you did it that way later. Okay, top is done. Let's do a bottom. Same exact thing. Bottom straight so it's a little nicer. Alrighty. Essentially we have a mask. At this point there's a few different finishing options you can do. I'm first going to show you the most basic and essential one, the one that's in the Craft Passion pattern, which I think works great. We're going to fold, we're going to go to the iron, we're going to fold this down a little more than 1/8 of an inch, probably like 1/4 of an inch. My demo area is not so great here. I'm going to show you the finished one. And then we're going to fold it down again and press it really hard. Steam that sucker. We want it to stay in shape. 2 9-inch pieces of elastic. And here's our little folded pieces. So the arrangement for this is that you would stitch this down, make a casing, and slide your elastic through. Instead of threading the elastic through a finished tube, because that's a little rough, you can actually slide this in here first and then top stitch it. This even works with the 1/4 inch elastic. You may end up having to fold this over a little wider for the 1/4 inch. Use your judgment. There we go. I'm just going to clip that. Put this one in the other side. Clip this. This makes it to where you can stitch it down, and then after it's stitched in, tie the elastic in to itself so that you have a loop. You just want to make sure you're not sewing through your elastic. That's the main thing. You want this elastic to be able to move freely up and down. So now we're going to do a little top stitch here. Same thing. Make sure you're tying off. That's not common for quilters. We like to not have to tie any knots, but today we're tying knots. I'm going to kind of pull this over. Make sure I can feel the cord on that side. Here, instead of elastic here, you could also use 1/8 inch ribbon. If you're an heirloomer, you probably have a lot of that. At this point, you would be able to go back and tie that around. Snip all my little threadies. I'll go ahead and do that other one. Alrighty, so now we're ready to tie these in a knot. I tie it like I tell people it's a balloon knot. So just kind of wrap it around. We want it to be close to the ends of these so that when people are using the mask, they have as much elastic as they need. So scoot that knot kind of toward the end. And snip. Sorry, get rid of these little hangy threads. Okay, then we're going to slip the knot into the sleeve. I'll make it nice and smooth up here for them. Clean it up as well as you want. These will be washed a lot, so I can't stress enough, you need to be back stitching. We don't want these masks to be an inconvenience for the people who are getting them. We want it to stay together and be reusable. Alrighty, once your mask is done, bring it to me at A&A Sewing. There's a couple other places taking them. We have great volunteers who will be driving them to the hospitals where the infectious disease crew is going to kind of distribute them as needed. But this is the most basic version of this mask. I will be posting more on a pocket insert and binding instead of putting the tube through. But thank you so much for watching. Go make some masks. Go save the world. This is a modification for my nurse friends who want to use a filter inside the mask. The normal masks that we made previously, those are more home use patients. Send them to your friends and family. Everybody should probably be wearing one at this point. I wanted to make a variety that was a little more sturdy and a little more friendly for the masks. So I've done my cutting, the same measurements, everything else is the same, but with our outer piece I've interfaced this with SF101. This is a woven interfacing, what we use for t-shirt quilts, or I use them for my teddy bears. It's just a kind of a woven, it feels like fabric, so we're basically thickening up that outer layer of fabric. The lining is the same, regular quilting cotton. So I'm going to start assembly just like we did before, lining up those edges. We want 1/4 inch at our standard stitch length. Okay, same thing for the lining. Make sure we're back stitching again. We're going to do the same method as before where we're snipping this at an angle toward our seam but not touching our seam to help that curve. This is going to be a little thicker on this piece now, so take your time. Then we're going to press our seam to one side just like we've done before. I'm going to lengthen my stitch length for this to help accommodate the thickness, especially for that outer piece that is now interfaced. But we don't have to go to the iron for this. We can kind of finger press it to the side and kind of get our top stitching on, making sure that the seam stays pressed one way the entire time. So far, this method is exactly the same as making the regular mask.
Are you going to be by yourself?
Oh, I'm not. Fletcher's here now, everybody, so I'm not by myself. Alright, so we're going to do the same thing. Press this big mask over to the side.
You have to say, your voice is getting way up, Connor.
Well, this is starting.
It's getting low. You have to say the mask thing. You're making a mask. Or, just in case.
Fletcher, can you tell everybody why I'm making masks?
It's because of the virus.
Why?
And no one wants to get sick, so we have to make masks.
Okay, so at this point, we're at the same stage that you would be at if you were making the regular lined mask. We're going to do a little additional step. So I've just top stitched the outer, I've top stitched the lining. Before we continue, I want to, essentially we're hemming these sides of the mask. So I'm folding it 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch. I'm going to go iron that, and then we're going to top stitch that. That's going to allow this to become a pocket for the main mask. So I'm going to go iron that, and I'll be right back. Okay, so the modification for the nurse's version is that I'm taking the lining, folding these edges in twice, so about 1/4 inch and 1/4 inch. Then I'm going to top stitch that before we continue. We want it really close to the edge because this is where they would be sliding in medical grade masks. And so that top stitching being close to the edge is going to help that survive the back and forth of that. So that's our pocket piece. So now we have an outer. The SF101 is optional. Okay, I don't want you to feel like you have to rush out and buy a ton of interfacing. Any interfacing will make it sturdier. So if you like that better, that's how you do that. But obviously it's not totally necessary. So now we're going to put the masks right sides together, kind of like completing it in the same way that we would with the regular weight mask. Just going to clip these 2 points, let the rest line up. Now it's noticeably shorter on those edges because this is a pocket. This is no longer the full lining. So there we go. I'm going to do the same thing when we're putting this together. We want that stitch kind of all the way across. We'll just make it a little easier. We're going to do this at our regular stitch. It says I'm about to run out of bobbin thread. And all right. So 1/4 of an inch all the way. You gotta pivot if you need to. To the end like I want that.
Now you can do it.
Now we're ready. Same thing, I'm lining this one up at my 1/4 inch.
That's a problem to me.
This can be pinned if you want it to be pinned, but it's such a small space that you don't really need to.
Pants.
Fletcher, do you want to be in my video about kids' masks?
Yes.
We'll do that next. Okay, you can go with that now. Alrighty, so there we go. Same thing. We're going to clip just a few snips on this one. Just in that deep curve. It's kind of where it's going to need it. I like to kind of chop off. You don't want to cut it all off, but we just want to limit. It's kind of like grading a seam. We just want to take some of that bulk out of where the seam joins. Okay. I'm going to turn this inside out, just like we did before. So all of this is pretty much the same. The main difference is that you're hemming the lining piece. And these instructions are given on the Craft Passion blog post about this as well. I'm not inventing this. I'm just spreading the word. Alrighty. There we go. So I'm going to hit it with the iron, and then we'll top stitch and finish our edges. Alrighty, I've got my 2 9-inch pieces of elastic for the ear parts. I've ironed it. We've kind of pressed it in place. I haven't done the top stitching yet. I'm trying something a little different. I'm thinking I might want to top stitch it, I don't know, like to this point. So I'm going to play with that this time. But essentially, everything else goes together the same way. You're going to do your top stitching, insert this, stitch that down, and then you have a mask that has a pocket that's capable for the medical people that will be using this. I have a couple nurse ladies, shout out to Val and Kristen, and so this is the version that they will need so that they can put a more medical grade product in here. I am obviously not a medical professional. I don't know exactly what that would be. I'm thinking anything would help, and so that's the goal with these. So I'm going to finish this up. We'll top stitch it. We'll have a couple little finished masks.